Know what to eat, but find yourself not eating it. Perhaps you've been on diets and off again and just wonder why you can't stick to them. The Eating For You podcast, hosted by me, Sally Ann Pisk, will show you what's been missing so you can enjoy a healthier way of eating that lasts. Hi, Sally Ann with you today, and I'm extra excited today as we're celebrating World Heart Day with Rebecca Lung. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Now, before we get underway, I just want to give you some of Rebecca's background. Dr. Rebecca Lung is the cardiometabolic dietitian and co-founder of Heartful Flavors. She's an accredited practicing dietitian and accredited sports dietitian. She holds a PhD in cardiometabolic health and aims to improve the heart and metabolic health of individuals through providing the best practical and evidence-based nutrition solutions. She launched a heart-healthy Asian seasonings range on a mission to eliminate excess sodium intake and support heart health. Rebecca was awarded the Dietitians Australia President's Award for Innovation for the development of these products. So, Rebecca, something I haven't mentioned to you in our correspondence so far, I was extra excited to track you down because about a week before I found you, I had actually been looking for some low salt seasonings for a meal. I end up doing something from scratch myself like I normally do. But it was really an eye-opener in terms of what's available in the market and how much added salt is in these products. We won't go into that now, but we'll come back to it. So I'm not just, I am someone also looking for these low salt alternatives, and will explain why during the podcast that they're so important. So Rebecca, tell me a little bit about why you chose to train as a dietitian and then specialise in cardiometabolic health.
Well, yeah, actually, I didn't set out to be a dietitian. I really love food and science, and I enrolled in a Bachelor of Food Science to be like a food technologist. And whilst I was studying that, I worked as a medical receptionist, and it was there that I saw firsthand how important it was for us to take care of our bodies and our health. And naturally, like combining my love of food with health was nutrition. And that led me to a Master of Nutrition Dietetics to become a dietitian. And then straight out of university as a dietitian, I started private practice to help people one-on-one and to improve their health. And I worked in different clinics in Sydney and drove to Lithgow as well, like rural area. And I worked in community health as part of the childhood obesity prevention program, supermarket nutrition for general nutrition education, and also outpatient hospital clinic for older adults. And no matter where I went, I kept seeing many people presenting with high cholesterol, triglycerides, blood pressure, high blood sugar, abdominal adiposity, heart conditions, diabetes, and fatty liver. So I also have a family history of these conditions, and we can't change our genes, but we can definitely change our lifestyle. And honestly, who doesn't know someone that has been affected by any of those conditions that I mentioned? Like 1 in 3 people, have high blood pressure. 2 in 3 have abnormal blood lipids. And that's basically 3 out of 3 adults. Of course, there is some overlap of the conditions because it's common, but there is research that shows when you control more than one of these parameters, it can reduce your risk of heart-related events. So I just thought I needed to understand this area further and how come these conditions keep presenting together. So I really wanted to advance my own knowledge and our knowledge in science overall. That led me, research questions, or questions always lead to research, and that led me to a PhD in nutrition and cardiometabolic health. That's the area I work in right now. So trying to use the best available evidence that we have right now, implementing the research and helping people improve their heart and metabolic health, no matter where it's through one-on-one consultations or through developing the heart healthy products that you already mentioned. Yeah. Now, you might be thinking, what is cardiometabolic health? Well, basically it means heart and metabolic health. It's a term that was first defined in 1999, the linked disorders of the metabolic syndrome that were predictive of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So, for example, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugars, insulin resistance, abdominal adiposity, those are predictive of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So having a good cardiometabolic health or heart and metabolic health means leading a healthy lifestyle to ensure you keep your blood cholesterols, triglycerides, sugar, insulin, blood pressure levels all in the normal range, and body composition is optimized, like to maintain or gain muscle mass and reducing abdominal fat.
Yes.
So that's what it means.
Yeah, and I think that's really wonderful too, that it's bringing this in this concept of body composition, because many of the clients that I work with, I tend to work with ladies who are 40 and older. And so the terminology is still
Mm.
very much about body weight, how much I weigh. And I'm
Mm.
forever reminding people weight doesn't really mean that much. Especially when we enter into our 50s, not only are we worried about maybe how much
Mm.
fat we're getting around our middle, but we're also worried about how much lean muscle mass we've got, and of course, how much bone we've got as well. So I think it's really lovely to talk about that body composition rather than weight straight out. So, in terms of heart health, and I know we're going to move more into blood pressure and sodium, but in
Mm.
terms of heart health, what do you think the key messages are people that need to understand about food, nutrition, and having better cardiometabolic health?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, heart health is really important, and heart disease is still the leading cause of death, affecting 1 in 4 deaths overall. And my PhD was definitely on nutrition and cardiometabolic health, so heart health. And I really looked at healthy, like dietary patterns, and like we look at the diet overall. So if you ask me about a top nutrition guideline, I'll definitely say follow a heart healthy dietary pattern or a healthy dietary pattern. Basically, a healthy dietary pattern not only supports your heart health, but can also help you, or has been associated with lowering risk of all-cause mortality. So a dietary pattern is basically like an overall diet a person follows, defined by the quantity, proportion, combination of the food and nutrients, and their consumption frequency. So we eat food that provides the nutrients, and when we eat a healthy diet overall, that gives us the other desirable nutrient characteristics, okay, which I will talk more about. So basically, there are many healthy dietary patterns. There's all different names for them, but the most renowned ones for heart health would be like the Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, which is their dietary approaches to stop hypertension, the Nordic and portfolio diets. The healthy dietary patterns, yeah, so these diets mostly contain vegetables, fruit, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds. All of them will limit discretionary, or what we call sometimes foods, which are
Mm.
basically foods to not consume every day, such as your chocolate or chips or biscuits. And then most of them recommend fatty fish. Some of them recommend low-fat dairy. So
Mm.
when you have all of these characteristics together of a healthy dietary pattern, it will give you those desired nutrient characteristics, which will be, it makes it naturally low in saturated fat, low in sodium, low in refined sugar or added sugar, and a low glycemic index, and also high in potassium.
Yes.
So that's what I would say, like a healthy dietary pattern, or the key principles are to support heart health.
Yes, and we've covered off the DASH dietary pattern on the podcast earlier as well, and it created a lot of interest. So that's why I really wanted to cover off heart health again with you today. So it's really wonderful mentioning the DASH protocol as well. And I think that was really exciting research because it really did show that changing what we eat is as powerful as going on to a medication. And maybe not for everyone, but certainly for some people, that is a possibility. And yeah, it was just great for that research to come through. In terms of working with your clients, are there any sort of nutrition myths or misconceptions about what they need to eat or perhaps cut out that are really not backed by evidence, Rebecca?
Yeah, really interesting. When you think about misconceptions, there's quite a lot. Like when people present, and I usually ask them, have they seen a dietitian before? Or if they say no, they might have seen BBC naturopath, or they could have like Googled something themselves and they come with different ideas, which is very normal and it's fine. So some of them, for example, might be coming saying they're trying a keto diet, right? Which is a very low carbohydrate diet. Sometimes they say they might be following a keto diet. It might not be a keto diet because it's very low carbohydrate. To achieve like 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates a day is very difficult, and it's actually not sustainable, because I think that's approximately 5 to 10% of their energy intake as carbohydrate. But we know the recommended acceptable macronutrient distribution range for carbohydrates is 45 to 65%. And of course, as we just described, from a healthy dietary pattern, like it includes whole grains. There is complex carbohydrates there. There's legumes there. There's still fruit there. They're all part of it. It's not about cutting that out. And the sad thing is sometimes people go on a keto diet because they may be diagnosed with high blood sugar and they search something, okay, and they did that. And they tried to cut out carbohydrates, but that's not exactly, and then they tend to eat more maybe like fat, because when you have less carbohydrate, obviously you can increase the fat and protein macronutrients, which are the other components, right? And it can increase more things like they might eat more fat or butter, cream, or like meats. And then the next blood test, they might get high cholesterol. And then that's when they come and see me. They're like, oh, now I got both. What do I do? And then we just have to talk about, it's managing blood sugars can be reducing sometimes foods that have the added sugar, right? But more importantly, it's about managing the carbohydrate proportion and carbohydrate distribution throughout the day.
Yeah.
It's not just cutting out carbohydrates, it's the spreading it out throughout the day so your body has time to process it and it's not going to have to spike in your blood sugar levels.
Yes.
And also more recently, similar to kind of like the keto diet, is the carnivore diet, which sometimes people come see me, and that the carnivore diet is like limiting plant foods, which is like the complete opposite of what I previously mentioned of the healthy dietary pattern principles. That's high in saturated fat, and people end up getting high cholesterol again, and that's why they come and see me. So that's just some of them. But of course, there's so many, and
Yeah.
there is like cholesterol as well, like dietary cholesterol. Like people in the past, like you maybe were told to pay attention to dietary cholesterol, but we know now that dietary cholesterol isn't the main thing that we should be limiting. It's more about the saturated fat that raises the blood cholesterol. And because our liver makes cholesterol, and every cell in our body has cholesterol because we have that phospholipid bilayer in every cell. So it's in the cell membrane and our liver will make it. So yeah, so it's not really, in terms of eggs, like there's no recommended limit, but if you do have heart disease existing or diabetes or cholesterol, then at the moment it says up to 6 a week, which is still quite a lot. And then in terms of seafood, some people come to see me like, oh, dietary cholesterol, I'm not supposed to have prawns or seafood. I'm like, well, no, the Mediterranean dietary pattern is pro in terms of fatty fish, which is high omega-3. We know omega-3 or fatty fish at least 2 to 3 times a week, and omega-3 can help lower triglycerides and also increase the HDL good cholesterol. Other interesting myths is like margarine. Like margarine was back in it was the 1950s where they did the partial hydrogenation process. And I actually remember I learned this in food science as well, so not just in nutrition.
Yes.
So it's the partial hydrogenation which created the trans fat that increases blood cholesterol. But since the 1990s, like we changed to a different method, which is enteroesterification, which doesn't create the trans fats. So saturated fat in terms of in margarine is 23%. So all fats usually have a component of saturated and unsaturated, right? And then butter is actually 70% saturated fat. So in that way, because we want to limit our saturated fat intake to not affect our cholesterol levels, then we'll go for margarine. And also margarine these days, they have the plant sterile ones, which could also help lower cholesterol further.
Yes. And I think it
Yeah.
comes back when listening to you talk. And of course, I've been a dietitian for over 30 years. So, Rebecca, you can
Mm,
imagine how many times these different dietary trends have come
mm,
and gone in that period of time.
yeah.
And it is so important. And I think this is where dietitians, we're getting better at it, but I think we can do it even better again, is
Mhm.
we look at the total picture. We don't just look at what's happening with the blood sugars, that story about the patient coming to you with high cholesterol because they'd followed a high fat, high protein diet. And also too, the risk for kidney disease in some people, and then also bowel cancer in others when you're overloading the body with saturated fats and high protein. And that's what I love, and I always have loved about our profession, is that we see the big picture and everyone's story is slightly different, and what we help them fine tune is different, and how we go about it. And I know for many people that I work with now, they want to have less processed foods. So I'm actually even asked, do I need butter or margarine on my bread? And I think with people sort of venturing into so many different sorts of grains and cooking methods these days, the requirement for margarine or butter is much less. Again, just in the group of ladies that I tend to work with. So we don't even need to have margarine necessarily. We can get enough
Mm,
oils from our olive oil and range of nuts and seeds. So I think that's what's interesting that I've seen sort of evolve, especially over the last 10 years, is that a lot of people want to eat less processed foods, even though margarine, as you've described, is not
mm,
as harmful to our health as it was when it was first developed. So I think it's really interesting, again, and this is what we're trying to do, is to look at what our clients want to do as well. For some, they need everything quick, so semi-prepared foods are going to be really important, right through to clients who just love cooking and need some tips to modify what they're doing for their health. So when we start looking at blood pressure, and of course we've already mentioned the dietary approaches to stop hypertension studies, What other sort of food guidelines are important? I know again it's plant-based, but anything else that you find works in your practice to help people with blood pressure?
Yeah. Yeah, so just sorry, touch back on the margarine and butter. Of course, yeah, of course you can use extra virgin olive oil. That in a way would be better. But I'll just talk about those two topics there. But
Yeah.
yes, blood pressure. Any further nutrition considerations will basically like you will still follow that healthy dietary pattern that I spoke about. In particular, keeping a closer eye on your sodium intake. If you're yeah, the average Australian intake for sodium is 3,600 milligrams, and then globally is 4,300 milligrams. Adequate intake is 460 to 920 milligrams a day, which is much less than that, isn't it? And then
Yes.
we also got a suggested dietary target, which is like 2,000 milligrams. But other guidelines, from some heart health organizations, is less than 1,500. So what
Mm,
we're doing is obviously, double double the recommendation at least,
yes.
and if we have high blood pressure because of that. But the other thing is, why I'm talking about sodium is there's actually no upper limit defined for sodium in our nutrient reference values, and that's because the upper limit is actually like where it poses no adverse health effects. But this was not determined for sodium, as the studies actually failed to determine an identifiable point at which the relationship between higher sodium intakes and higher blood pressure did not occur. And
Mm,
of course, research does show that lower sodium intake levels have been shown to lower blood pressure,
yes.
such as when they looked at a DASH diet with less
Mm,
than 1,500 milligrams of sodium had further reductions in blood pressure than the less than 2,300 milligrams sodium one.
yeah.
So yeah, using herbs and spices, instead of salt, that's always recommended, even in the Mediterranean dietary pattern or other healthy dietary patterns. Putting sauces on the side, choosing no added salt items when you can, and then also thinking about preferences for food and maybe trying to change that over time, like your taste bud adaptation to natural flavors as well, and less of the salty taste or more preferences for the herbs and spices. The other nutrition consideration would be increasing potassium intake. And again, it comes back to the healthy dietary pattern where if you do follow it, having the legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, dairy, and fish all have potassium. And then of course like less alcohol, as alcohol can narrow the blood vessels, which raises blood pressure. And then caffeine, but the caffeine only acutely increases blood pressure. But it's good to keep it to safe limits, which is like 3 cups of coffee or 4 cups of tea generally for adults. And then making sure you don't check your blood pressure within having caffeine, like within 30 minutes of having caffeine. Yeah, because that will
Yes.
affect.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too. I haven't kept up with the research in this area, but of course, those guidelines, I think, for caffeinated beverages would relate on how quickly your body actually metabolizes caffeine. And I remember way back in 2012, we had the International Congress for Nutrition and Dietetics in Sydney. And at the time, I had been literally like nearly pulling my hair out because I'd read one study saying how coffee was beneficial for health, and then another one would say, oh no, it increases anxiety, increases blood pressure. And then, of course, at this particular conference, we talked more about the nutrigenomics, how nutrition impacts on our genes and how some people are slow metabolizers of caffeine, which is me. And I had just worked that out myself in terms of what I could tolerate. So again, I think these guidelines are wonderful, but this is where working with a dietitian helps you actually then personalize them to say, well, what happens when you drink caffeine, or if they're coming in saying I'm having trouble falling asleep or I get heart palpitations, at this time of the day, then we can start looking at those personalized recommendations as well. And I think it is really important just to touch back on the nutrition guidelines, the nutrient reference values. I think they've set, I was looking at them this morning, and I think they've set sodium at 2,300. And again, I think it comes down to so many other factors too, in terms of what's impacting on people's blood pressure. We're all individuals. So again, why it's really important to work with your doctor and your dietitian to work out what's right for you. I've got another question for you here, Rebecca, more about why has there been so much salt added to processed foods? Because I know around 75% they're excess salt from processed food. Is it all about taste, or for some foods, is there a role that the sodium's playing as a preservative?
I mean, well, firstly, in bread, I think back then when they were trying to make sure we get iodine, then they made the iodized salt and that has to be fortified, right? So sometimes in terms of some of the foods, there's salt there to preserve it. Like that's how they kind of pickle things in the past, in the olden days, to keep it there. But these days with the technology, such as even canning, and they can it, the canned food can last for 50 years or more, and it doesn't have to have added salt there. Like basically it's a sterile environment where they heat treat it and there's no bacteria, so it should be able to stay there for like 50 years or longer. So there's actually no necessary reason that they need to add that to preserve it, particularly if you're using any dry goods as well, like so your herbs and spices that we normally have, they're dry, they're going to last for a long time, they're not going to go off, you don't need to add salt to it.
No.
And then yeah, and in terms of like what is the food industry doing, well, basically, I remember learning food science. There's this kind of like triangle where they look at like whatever they add and in terms of the flavor and how to get your tongue just to not just your tongue, but overall, like just to get to the point where you are satisfied, but not satisfied enough, so you keep eating. So there is a science behind it. I actually forgot what the name exactly of that is called, but they try to develop that, for example, like for Doritos and things like that,
Yeah.
or particular chips. Like so, you just keep eating it to obviously increase their sales. It's and like because the people are used to that salty taste. Like we have a higher salt taste threshold, which means we need more salt to be able to taste salt, right? But then if you can lower your sodium intake, you can actually adapt your taste buds in terms of lowering the salt taste to then needing less of it to taste salt. So we can do the opposite. And there are countries that have stricter guidelines and they're trying to enforce for the food industry to lower the sodium intake. And the World Health Organization has those as well, those targets to reduce sodium in our food. So hopefully we are working towards that, but there is always going to be some pushback from food industry and things like that. Because I guess salt can make things, it's cheap as well as an ingredient. So it can make things taste good without costing too much for them. Obviously, if they add whole foods flavor, it's going to be way more expensive. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it's really important to share that, Rebecca, because again, another reason why I'm excited about today's episode is that, rightly so, we spend a lot of time talking about added sugar, but we don't talk nearly enough about added salt. And it's kind of that hidden ingredient in many ways, as is sugar, unless you read the labels on your processed foods. And it's something that people are just not aware of. And of course, people understand, oh, I shouldn't add salt to my cooking, or I shouldn't add salt once my vegetables are cooked. But that's the least of our worries. It's what's coming in the processed foods that we need to be careful of. And it is true. That's that creation of the sterile environment. I do it at home. I tend to make my own passata every autumn after I get my crop of tomatoes, and I just vacuum seal them. I do the old boiling method and heat them up and seal the jars, and they last. I'm having some tomatoes at the moment that are over 3 years old, and they're totally preserved. Beautiful flavor, beautiful color, no added salt in that processing method. And of course, when that's done in a commercial environment, then it's done to higher temperatures. And as you said, the canning process is very, very sterile as well. So certainly buying something that's canned, we don't need to have the added salt. We can then add in our own flavorings, especially if it's lentils and legumes and ingredients like that. So thanks for explaining that process. And I think for all of us, if we eat mindfully, we do know what that personal threshold is for both sweetness and salty foods as well, in terms of, oh, I think I've had enough. But of course, that's the other part of the eating process, which I sort of am very passionate about, and that is encouraging people to actually really eat mindfully and taste their food and just see how much of these different added ingredients you actually need, if you need them at all. But again, like you were saying before, just gradually cutting back on the foods that have added salt is definitely a way to go.
I was just going to say, with what you said, with yeah, tomato paste as well, there are ones without no added salt, which is what I look for anyway. It's like 99% or something tomato. And then maybe there's an acidity regulator, and that's it, which is fine. And then what else? So you mentioned no added sugar, of course. Yeah, because people know that message now, which is great. So then it's like adding it, using that or relaying that to no added salt too. Because sometimes when I speak to clients and they're like, oh yeah, it's just like you reduce your sugar, you can reduce your salt. And they're like, oh, I get it now. Yeah, of course. My taste buds can adapt to less sugar. So I can adapt to less salt.
Yes.
It's just kind of telling that. And in terms of the food industry and the food supply, it actually does come back to consumers in a way, not just the government, but also consumers. Like if we can demand less of it, then they will make less of it because you're not buying it. And that's how they do it. Yeah. So I thought that was important.
Yeah, no, it is. And sort of moving on to your development of your products soon. But before we do that, is there anything else about
Mm.
nutrition and heart health and blood pressure in particular you wanted to share?
Well, I guess if you're talking about nutrients and blood pressure, it will just go back to sodium. And I think some people maybe don't know the explanation of why it happens. Like they're just like, oh, salt raises my blood pressure, but why and how? If you tell people why and how, then they're maybe more inclined to make a change. Basically, like excess salt, right? You retain more water. You retain more water means you have more blood volume. More blood volume also means it's harder to pump, high blood pressure, okay? And then also salt itself can narrow the blood vessel. So if you have a more narrow blood vessel, it's harder to pump, high blood pressure. And then your high blood pressure pumps everywhere, so it can affect all your organs because it's
Yes.
not an environment that your organs are used to. And with that, it's good that there is Cochrane, like a systematic review. So normally in terms of studies, I don't always just look at one study. I love looking at systematic reviews, which is basically a collection of all different types of studies to get a overall conclusion because different studies have maybe different biases and different ways on how they did the method. So sort of check that. And there are studies where, in terms of the Cochrane review, where they showed the low sodium diet versus a high sodium diet and on high blood pressure. And of course, a low sodium diet reduced blood pressure in both people with normal blood pressure and high blood pressure. And then it also, maybe there was a greater effect on people of Asian and African descent, which is what they found in the 2020 review. But it's important to know that even if you're not salt sensitive, but people with high blood pressure, 50% of them or more are salt sensitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but even if they aren't, just think about sodium intake itself. It's attributed to 1.9 million deaths globally just from excess sodium. So it's not just about blood pressure. It is that it can increase the risk of other conditions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And especially like I know I have family experience of this. My mum developed blood pressure and she had some irreversible eye damage done because it was affecting the small blood vessels of her eye. I
Mm,
also, husband is salt sensitive, and his cardiologist
mm,
sort of said it to him in passing, saying, "Oh, we're not able. Your kidneys are not able to filter out the sodium as well." And that contributes to even some edema in some people. So again, we're all individual, and if our bodies don't have ideal blood pressure or we do get some edema from excess salt, and I know that can be a case for women during menopause. Salt becomes one of those additives that can become an issue with water retention during menopause. So all of these little subtle changes that happen at different times of our life are really important to note, and then see if we can do something with nutrition and other lifestyle changes as well. Of course, again, talk to your doctor if you notice any changes, have proper investigations done as well. But Rebecca,
mm,
I think that is really important to understand that your body does have a way of managing how much sodium we retain in our blood for our blood pressure, and the fact that the kidneys actually have to excrete the excess sodium. So again, it kind of
mm,
makes sense if we don't want to put too much pressure on any particular organ in the body, then if we
mm,
can lower
mm.
our salt intake, it's really beneficial to do. So tell me, how
Yeah.
did you start your interest? I know you started your career in food science, so it may have been there
Mm.
right early on, but your interest in developing your heartful flavors range.
Well, I mean, the interest in terms of food was always since young, right? Growing up in Sydney is all these different cultural foods. But as I became a dietitian, I learned more about it. And obviously, doing a PhD in heart metabolic health, I knew more and more about it. So I guess I wanted to enjoy my Asian dishes every day without compromising my health. And I found it in a way impossible. Like, how do you create Asian meals and those flavors without salt or salty sauces? Because they regularly use like soy sauce, fish sauce, and oyster sauce. Like, that's what they use to create those flavors.
Yes.
And over time, I found myself limiting those two occasions. And it was really disheartening to watching clients, family, and friends consume meals that were high in sodium and unbalanced in nutrition because the Asian meals often were. And then food is, of course, integral to our culture, and I didn't want to lose that. And I felt that I really needed to find a solution. I'm just like, oh, well, I have a food science background. I'm also a dietitian. I know this area really well. Why couldn't I do something about it? So basically, combining the food science and dietetics knowledge, and then with some university friends, we created Heartful Flavors, which is salt-free Asian seasonings made with only whole food ingredients, and we pair it with nutritionally balanced recipes to help people enjoy their favorite Asian dishes in a heart healthy way every day. So like the whole food ingredients for natural flavor, which is what we spoke about, like fruit, like the whole food ingredients, actually fruit, vegetables, herbs and spices, which are included in the healthy dietary patterns that we spoke about. And then also the back of pack recipes. Like I remember seeing a study, it's actually from Newcastle University, where they looked at meal bases and because meal bases, people use it for convenience in terms of cooking, right? But 70% actually follow the back of pack recipe. So that is a clear opportunity for us to increase our food group serves. So, and they found that most of them were inadequate in vegetables. It was less than 2 serves a meal. So all of our back of pack recipes, we took it as an opportunity to obviously showcase a nutritionally balanced recipe if people do follow it, which is great, and to help people meet their nutritional requirements where there's 2.5 serves or more of vegetables. And it's designed to align with the healthy dietary patterns that we spoke about, like giving friendly reminders of whole grains or enough vegetables or variety of vegetables, fruit when we can incorporate it, or extra virgin olive oil. That's all on the ingredient list. And incorporating like tofu, like soy proteins, because we know that can support heart health, lower cholesterol, legumes, nuts, and seafood. And also friendly reminders to limit red meat, which I forgot to mention before, but most of those healthy dietary patterns do limit red meat because of heme iron, and heme iron can actually be a toxin. Yeah, so all of that actually, brings it back to, if you follow that healthy dietary pattern, it's going to be low in sodium, obviously from the flavoring, but also from the just naturally low in sodium from those foods. But also the potassium will be high as well. So I forgot to mention about the sodium potassium ratio. That's also an important parameter in terms of lowering blood pressure. So basically, the Heartful Flavors products is a way to incorporate all those, whatever I learned from current evidence base that we know, all those healthy dietary patterns principles together, to make it possible to enjoy these Asian meals in a heart healthy way.
That was really important. And I think too, with that ratio of sodium to potassium, the fact that most Australians are not eating enough vegetables and not eating enough fruit doesn't help. Plus, all the excess sodium that we're getting from processed foods makes it really difficult to get that ideal ratio between potassium and sodium. I'm sure our listeners and viewers will be interested in your comment about the red meat and heme iron. Can you just explain a little bit more about the research into heme iron being maybe treated like a toxin in some people?
Yeah, so actually part of my PhD, I looked at dietary intake, not just dietary patterns, I actually looked at dietary iron intakes, and I presented this in a few conferences. And it was looking at, we actually looked at, so heme iron, right, is mostly from animal, is basically from animal products.
Yes.
And then you got non-heme iron. So there's two types of iron, right? Non-heme iron is mostly from plant-based products. So basically, when we just looking at nutrients specifically, like those two nutrients, and we try to adjust for we adjusted for the healthy dietary pattern that people eat already. So you adjust for age and gender, different things like that. And then you're seeing how that affects, or is it associated with heart? We looked at cardiovascular events. Like, for example, a cardiovascular event would be like myocardial infarction, or like stroke, or heart failure. So basically what we found was non-heme iron intake, I think, was associated with reducing the risk of those cardiovascular events. And then the heme iron was associated with an increased risk of those events. And then when we looked at, usually when you find an association, you have to make sure there's a plausible mechanism. So when we look into a plausible mechanism, it was that if you look at other studies, heme iron has been found to be toxic because we have something called a heme scavenger. It's interesting. We have something going around trying to remove the heme from our body. But when you exceed that, then there's extra heme by itself floating around, which is toxic.
Yeah, it's fascinating too. And again, looking at those plant-based sources of iron, they're bringing so much other nutritional value to our health and well-being as
Mm.
well. So it's like a win-win. And if you look
Mm.
traditionally, humans didn't eat a lot of meat. Sure, we have a digestive system that allows us to adapt to different types of foods, but our digestive system is really set up at the moment to deal with more plant foods than meat as well. So I think it's important we look at what we are designed to eat and process well and what supports our health. So I think if you're listening and thinking, oh no, am I eating too much meat? Don't worry, I will leave some blog posts that do have the current guidelines around what is recommended, our different protein sources. So please don't worry about that. And I think it's great that Rebecca has brought it up because it is related to heart health, which is what we are promoting
Yeah.
today. So, Rebecca, where can people find out more about your Heartful Flavors? And I did check before our recording today, you do actually have them available at some retail outlets in around Sydney and some interstate as well. So that's all on your website, isn't it?
Yeah, so I'll be at heartfulflavors.com. So heart and then heart FEL for heartful and then flavors.com. So that's where you can find more about products, recipes we have. We also have a learn blog that we talk more about healthy dietary patterns and, our sodium requirements. And then on Instagram, it's also Heartful Flavors or at Heartful Flavors. In terms of like my dietetic services more or other blog content can be on cardiometabolicdietitian.com, or you can just find me on at cardiometabolic dietitian on Instagram or Facebook as well.
Yeah. No, I'll make sure all of your links are provided with this episode's notes. But before we round up, tell me how you picked the three flavors or the three sort of flavors of the seasonings that you have available.
Yeah, that was a it's a good question. I mean, I think how we came up with it was firstly for me, I love pho. And I'm Chinese, Vietnamese background, and growing up, I always had pho. But to me, I would limit it. It'll be to like once a week because I know how much salt or fish sauce they add to it. And I was like, why can't I have one that's healthy at home? And knowing that like you can use it with the herbs and spices, just remove the salt or the fish sauce component. So I was like, why not? Why can't we make that healthy at home? So that's one of them.
Yeah.
And then of course, in terms of Korean flavors, I mean, there is popularity of growing from Korean flavors, but also Koreans have actually quite a high salt intake. And I think pretty sure part of their government and all that public health campaigns are trying to reduce and lower their sodium intake because it's really high, and they also have a higher risk of quite a lot of them have problems with cancer as well on the excess sodium intake. So we thought, why not try to reduce the sodium in the Korean flavor, which is like we use bibimbap, but that bibimbap that we meal base that we have can actually be used as gochujang, which gochujang is a typical Korean traditional sauce that can be used for so many dishes as a base. So that's why we thought about that one. And of course, green curry is very popular in Australia. We love Thai food here.
Yes.
And why can't we have a healthy one? Like every time we eat Thai food, it's always sweet and salty, right? But why can't we have a version that has no added salt and no added sugar?
Yeah.
So that's what we thought about.
Yes, yes. No, I haven't got around to ordering my set yet, but I'm definitely going to because I was reflecting again this morning before our conversation and our recent interstate holiday. I packed up like a little container of all of our herbs and spices to take with us because we were self-cooking in an apartment. And I'm thinking, oh my
Yeah,
goodness, if I could get some of these sachets of Rebecca's, that would be much easier. I don't have to pack all these individual herbs and spices to take with me. So
yeah.
I think it's a great variety of flavorings that you've come up. Your seasonings look amazing. So again, Rebecca, before we finish up, is there anything else that you would like to share?
Well, just what you said actually, when we were sampling about those products at stores, like people were trying them, like we had some parents buy them because they travel overseas quite a bit, and they were like, "Well, I can't have my kids eating out all the time, and what can I do?" Obviously, we can find fruit and veggies and things like that everywhere in different parts of the world. That's fine. We have that, just in different forms. But in terms of the flavoring, what can they do? And they were thought this was light, so they actually took that overseas to cook for their kids. Yeah,
Yeah, no, no. I think
good
it's
idea.
really practical, and I always hope when we have traveled and left like leftover olive oil and herbs and spices that they don't just all get thrown out, someone actually uses them. But I thought, again, from a food wastage point of view, that the sachets were a great alternative as well. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time today. And I really believe that this episode will be of great interest to many, many women, and lots of practical tips have been shared. And as I said, I'll make sure the links to all of your pages are provided with this episode's notes.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure. It was really fun.
That's great. And if you've been listening along today and you've enjoyed this episode, please let us know, and please share the link on your social media pages. And if you haven't subscribed yet, then please do so you don't miss out on our future episodes. You have been listening to the Eating For You podcast with Sally Ann Pisk. If a long-term way of healthier eating is of interest to you, then make sure you subscribe to our podcast.